Content moderation, censorship, and free speech top of mind today as the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments for whether the First Amendment was violated when government officials asked social media platforms to remove posts that they considered false or misleading.
At the core of the case, as when Biden administration was policing misinformation about the 2020 election and COVID-19.
And I believe we have footage of Justice Samuel Alito asking a very pointed question of the government's attorney at the case, which it's happening right now. So I'm sure there'll be more for us to react to tomorrow. But here's some of that right now.
Mr. Fletcher, when I read all of the emails exchanged between the White House and other federal officials and Facebook in particular, but also some of the other platforms, and I see that the White House and federal officials are repeatedly saying that Facebook and the federal government should be partners. We're on the same team. Officials are demanding answers. I want an answer. I want it right away. When they're unhappy, they curse them out. There are regular meetings. There is constant pestering. Wow, I cannot imagine federal officials taking that approach to the print media.
So I thought that was a pretty interesting exchange, getting to the root of it. Alito pointing out all this evidence we have of communications between so many different government branches, the White House included, and how we would certainly consider that. We would look at that skeptically. We would be concerned if it was this level with newspapers, with magazines, with other forms of media, this much harassment by government officials. Now, it is true that government officials can be angry with, I'm sure they're pretty angry with all these stories about Biden's age that are finally appearing in mainstream outlets on mainstream channels. I bet CNN and the New York Times are getting upset calls from Biden staffers. So that is, it's not violating the First Amendment necessarily to just have government officials venting at you, not liking your coverage. But the question at the root of this case is, when does this become, when it's connected to multiple government officials saying that, well, we're going to look at antitrust law, we're going to look at Section 230 unless you do more, specifically in the context of the COVID stuff. And then later, I did watch a bit more of it. So that was Alito asking, and then him and the government attorney go back and forth. The government attorney saying, really trying to be very accommodating and saying, well, I'm hearing you, but remember, this was a once-in-a-century pandemic with thousands and thousands and thousands of people dying. We're all very concerned, and it was the president's position that Facebook and other places could be doing more, and he said so. And so this was a unique situation that called for greater government communications with social media platforms, was essentially what the government attorney took.
I don't know where that conversation went from there, but it does seem like that's an argument for the government paying for more ads on whatever platform there is. There's nothing that prohibits the government, and the government often does this for public health reasons, run commercials. We've all seen those kind of public interest commercials on TV, in newspapers, and on social media. The question was really about what people were being prevented from saying and doing on those apps. Was it misinformation that needed to be pulled down if you talked about a home remedy for COVID, even if it wasn't accurate? Was that something that merited censorship? Or, I think more pointedly, conversations about lab leak theory, conversations about herd immunity, conversations that, frankly, time in many ways have validated were part of the censorship cull at the time. And should that be something that the court validates in this instance or not? The tone of Alito's remarks seem obviously quite skeptical of the practice. And I do also wonder if people can and should read into how the court might address a TikTok ban if it gets to the place where it's before the Supreme Court. Because even folks, Joe Biden says he's supported. There's a lot of bipartisan support for that particular policy. And if it does manage to pass the Senate, is the last line of defense going to be it being declared unconstitutional? Is the court going to say, well, this is different because this is about a foreign ownership of a company, yada, yada, and then therefore it isn't in the same kind of clear speech grounds? Or is there going to be kind of an acknowledgement that this is the apotheosis of the kind of government pressure that we saw evidence of on Twitter and Facebook during 2020?
Yes.
And even after, kind of 2016.
And you're right, the courts did kill Trump's TikTok ban because it was an executive order. I think it's not at the Supreme Court level. I think it was at a lower court level, specifically because of the executive order. Now, it might be that legislation would be different. And again, in this case, we're not talking about legislation. We're talking about just actions undertaken by government agents. I think the Supreme Court has in the past, specifically with Section 230, some of the other cases we've discussed, they've been like, look, you can't, you're having all this administrative action, all this action by government officials without any new legislation being crafted on this. You're asking us to imagine that Section 230 says something different than it actually says.
Right.
If you wanted to fix this, you could write a bill, pass it, and then we could weigh in whether that's consistent with the First Amendment. So I think they might give more leeway to an actual, for instance, actual TikTok ban that is legislation. However, at the same time, I mean, I would be against that, and I would be for them striking it down because this Supreme Court, whatever you like or dislike about it, people refer to it as like so partisan and so obviously Republican versus Democrat. There is a lot of, I think the best thing you can say about the Supreme Court is over time has become more and more pro-free speech in a somewhat politically neutral way or not a particularly partisan way. I think there is a healthy level of semi-agreement on questions such as this one on free speech. I can point to cases in the past that have gone that from violent video games to the trademarking thing over the Asian group, that all that stuff. So we'll see. I think really the question, since I expect in this decision to be kind of a win for the pro-free speech side, the question will be though how much of a line do they draw? Do they end up saying all communications with government officials violate the First Amendment and can't, which would obviously not make any sense. So they're going to say, because, police are going to still be able, right, to contact Facebook if they think there's a child pornography. Like there are cases where the government...
Even short of that, flacking is real. I mean, what is the difference? What is the line between an elected representative, whether the president or a senator or a member of the House, saying, hey, you wrote a series of stories about me. I think here are these factual inaccuracies. Have you considered it this way? I mean, that's what comms teams do. So they call media organizations up and they try to spin stories in their favor, or they try to suggest stories that would benefit their principal. And what is the line between someone doing that, if you're the President of the United States, having your comms team reach out and say, hey, I don't like X, Y, and Z story, and reaching out to a social media platform and saying, hey, I want you to suppress these kinds of stories. I mean, I do think that is a line to be aware of, but I think there is a substantial difference, frankly.
Yes, and I think there's a difference also between, for instance, members of the House and Senate have broader and more protected rights to just engage in debate that are actually protected under the Constitution. So I don't think anyone would actually take the position that those, it might be distasteful, it might be something, but you're supposed to, the remedy for them doing too much job owning and forcing the social media companies is you're supposed to vote them out of office if you don't like it, which is different than the CDC or the FBI or DHS doing it. Those people are not elected. Those are bureaucrats. So there might be a difference between, are you a political figure that ostensibly the remedy for your bad speech is just to vote you out of office, and you are part of an administrative agency and state?
But then you get back to the problem that you were raising before about, okay, sometimes the police have to solve crimes. Right. If you accept that premise, that same is true for the FBI and some of these other organizations that have a mandate to protect the public health or more direct safety interests in terms of actual crimes or terrorism and the like. And where does that line get drawn? And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come back to the organization, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever, the social media platform, having policies in effect that they've really thought through and that they can stand by so that they're not subject to some of this lobbying. Because remember, you've said this often, that when you go back and look through the Twitter files, what you recognize is that Twitter was offering a lot of pushback. And frankly, apart from succumbing in a couple of instances that were important, I don't mean to trivialize those with the Hunter Biden laptop story and the Trump ban and the like, they were actually, frankly, pushing back, saying we can't do this. This is a violation of our policies. And I think this gets back to the conversation we were having a little bit earlier in our segment about the Don Lemon, Elon Musk interview, which I encourage everybody to go and watch. There's this interesting tension around whether or not the issue is the policy bad and censorious, or are you applying the policy in inaccurate ways, in asymmetrical ways?
And whether the underlying speech is is illegal or is advocating for some kind of illegal content, which distinguishes something that maybe Congress has passed laws.
Sure.
There are already laws on the books to deter some of that sexual abuse material.
But the problem here, Robbie, is when it's short of illegal, that's when all of the questions arise. Yeah. And, it's not illegal for the Elon Jets account to exist, for instance, right? And that was one of the early moments of hypocrisy. Remember all of the debate around, what's the name, Kanye West's and weird symbol that was like a swastika crossed with a Star of David, and whether or not that symbol violated Twitter's policies. Is it anti-Semitic is a very different question of, is it actually in violation of Twitter's policies? Is Elon Musk letting Alex Jones back on or keeping him off on the basis of Twitter's policies, or because he personally has lost a child and finds it distasteful that Alex Jones is a Sandy Hook truther, and that's the basis of the ban?
I just worry that, and I agree that the policy should be drawn as tightly and specific as possible, but there's always just going to be a little bit of it could go either way. Is that hateful or is that
I don't know. I
learned that from talking to people who've actually been involved in content moderation, is that it is very difficult.
These are not even border cases that I'm talking about here. This is Elon Musk going on his own website and saying out loud, "Hey, vote, guys. Should we let Alex Jones back on or off?" That's quite clearly not him applying a policy other than majority rules.
That doesn't make a lot of sense before, but.
So this will be interesting to watch. Stick with us for more coverage. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.